This time in Basics for Beginners, we're taking a look at an intro to typography.
TipTut.
This series was recorded during the coronavirus scare, and due to spacing issues in the house, we'll have no webcam. Sorry about that, but hopefully you can still learn something from this tutorial series. Hello everybody and welcome back to TipTut, and welcome to another Basics for Beginners episode where we take a look at typography theory. This time we're taking a look at the basics of type. What is the most basic question? Well, that is, what is typography? Typography is the art of working with type, otherwise known as text or copy. So in the same way that designers would work with the visuals of a piece, it might be the images, the illustrations, typographers work with the text. They imbue their designs with meaning and import and ideas to connote certain ideas about the type, the text that they're making. How is this done and what is important about that? Well, first of all, good type should be legible, and legibility basically means the ability to understand what it is that is trying to be communicated, and that's in type generally considered with readability. How easy is it to consume and understand the text as we normally interpret it? We normally interpret it as text that connotes a word. How easy is that to see the word? That's readability. Legibility, readability, other factors of type are all influenced by different components that make up the typeface. And some components here are all highlighted in yellow, as you can see in these selections over here on the right. We'll go through all of this, but before we do, we should probably explore some basic terminology. So, typeface and font. What are they? What's the difference? A fun fact for you is that typefaces used to relate to physical pieces of metal that a typographer would have. They'd line them all up in a little row, like so, to form sentences within books, and then ink was pressed against these to create the page in a book. Kind of like how a typewriter works, but you lay out all these individual blocks by hand. That is a typeface. So all of the characters, numbers, letters, glyphs, punctuation marks that make up a complete typeface would be every single different weighting and font in that typeface. So, for example, a typeface would be Times New Roman. A font within the Times New Roman typeface would be Times New Roman Italic, for example. So the font would be all of the italic characters within Times New Roman. Some people also attribute size to that as well. So Times New Roman Bold 12 point is a font within the Times New Roman general typeface. These days, they're largely interchangeable because everything's digital now, but back in the day, that was obviously a very important distinction. Some more pieces of general terminology then. Copy. When somebody refers to copy, they're usually talking about all of the text that makes up a piece of media. For example, someone might say, "Can you send me the latest copy for the product brochure?" And that would mean every single piece of text in there that makes up the entire document. A character is generally referred to as any letter, number, or symbol used in a typeface, sometimes referred to as glyphs. Largely they are interchangeable. I'm sure some typographers are going to get angry at me because A, I don't know, and B, I won't explain because I don't know the intricacies of what the difference between a character and a glyph is. As far as I'm aware, a character is something like an uppercase or lowercase letter, and a glyph includes all of the punctuation, but that could be horribly wrong. Typeface categorization then. How do we define different typefaces? You've probably heard of things like serif and non-serif and script and stuff like that. So I thought it might be worthwhile to just break these down. So they're categorized based on their components, and different styles suit different situations. So some are easier to read in print, for example, and some will work better on digital displays. You've probably seen serif fonts. All these little extra tiddly bits on the end are called serifs. They're usually used in print, and that's because it's argued that these little extra add-on serif sections here, which actually are layover from the days when we used to physically chisel letters into stone, that makes it easier to read in print, whereas leaving these out arguably makes it easier to read on a screen. If you imagine the age-old days of computer screens where the full resolution was something like 128 by 128 pixels or even less than that, really terribly small monitors, all these little details would have been lost and it would probably cause some confusion. So that's why people argue that sans serif fonts are better for digital displays. But let's go through them one by one and just show you what they all mean. A serif font then. So serifs are the small lines and flourishes that accent certain typefaces. So these little bits on the end, yeah? They're usually considered more traditional and therefore portray a sense of trust and reliability. I've already said they're used often in print, and where they argue that the serifs aid with readability in both body copy and titles or headlines, which is larger or smaller sizes of fonts. The benefit of this is up for debate, however. You can argue it either way, but it is largely agreed they are easier to read. So there are loads of different subclasses of serif, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but feel free to explore these further. They basically started off with the humanist or old style in, I think, around the early 1400s, and since then have grown to transitional, neoclassical and didone, slab, clarendon and glyphic. So all of these mean certain things. Slab, you can probably guess, are these large blocky styles of serif, yeah? And the humanist and transitional ones are some of the more original ones. As they're moving on to the glyphic and clarendon, they're the more modern things, maybe like worker or gin 18 point. Yeah. Sans serif then are typefaces that do not have those little flourishes on the end, and that's generally considered the only difference. They're also generally considered more modern and first appeared during the 1700s or the 18th century. Largely, they are more approachable, friendly, and modern, and you see a lot of the time these days sans serif fonts used in conjunction with serif fonts, especially on web pages and things. They're good for conveying a sense of playfulness or a simple nature because the shapes themselves are much, much simpler in their form. There are different styles of sans serif as there are different styles of serif. Grotesque, neo-grotesque, humanist, and geometric. Again, you can probably guess. Century Gothic is a geometric sans serif, although also it's one of the older ones, so it's probably grotesque as well. Again, lots of typographers are probably going to get angry at me. There's a whole world of this, so please go and explore it yourself. Moving on. Excuse me. Script. Script typefaces look like or supposed to emulate handwriting. There's generally two types, which is going to be casual and formal, and you can probably see just at a glance what those two types look like. Okay, they're fluid, they flow, they can convey a sense of elegance and importance. That's usually going to be the formal type. Casual typefaces, on the other hand, are more playful and approachable, but can look amateur and can be quite hard to read. That's both formal and casual, can be quite hard to read. Display and decorative then. So these are largely fonts that work best for titles as opposed to body copy. So they are not intended for large amounts of text. You can probably see that if I wrote this paragraph here in this rounded text down there, it would probably be quite hard to read. So they're usually more artistic. And they are used and modified in logos a lot of the time. So usually they'll take something, and they might round off the corner of some text here and use that in a logo or something like that. They're usually used to draw attention rather than to convey a lot of textual information. Monospaced are a particular type of font that each character has the same width. So you'll obviously find that in a lot of cases, actually I can just use this paragraph as an example, the A here is much, much wider than the I here, yeah? And the same if you draw it in your handwriting, you'll probably notice that the A is much wider than the I because it's just a line, yeah? In monospaced, as opposed to proportional, in monospaced they're all equally distance. So the A is the same width as the B is the same width as the C. This had a lot of popularity in early computer work because, again, it was easier to read on a lower resolution screen, and therefore they do remind people of the olden times and do look a bit dated. But if you want to convey a particular thing, like, I don't know, the sense of a typewriter, you could use a monospaced font. Then there's dingbats and speciality typefaces. Now these are, that should say dingbats. I'm gonna scribble that out. Didn't change that. Dingbat. Dingbat typefaces are usually useless apart from their intended purpose. A lot of the times, for example, a web designer might create a font that they can type out different shapes based on characters within the typeface. So you might see an icon that looks like a person in a circle, and then there might be an icon that looks like an open book. Yeah. Now, designers could load each of these icons in as individual image files, or they could install a single font on a website and have all of these at a very easily accessible way. Yeah. Wingdings is an example. Yeah. They are very limited and usually created to suit a specific task. So let's talk about font variations. You probably know these, yeah? Bold, italic, etc. I won't spend too long on this, but there are probably a couple that you might not know or that you might want to explore a little bit further. So there's condensed, narrow, extended, etc. And you can combine them as well. You can have bold, italic, as well as just bold. So regular fonts are the basic version of the font with no additions or variations. And here we have Helvetica Neue as an example. Bold fonts are thicker in weight, and they are used for emphasis. There are several weights when you make a font. Usually it's sort of 400. The class of weight is 400 for regular and 700 for bold. But there's a sliding scale all the way up. And typographers usually just select points on this sliding scale that they can class as regular, bold, etc. Newer fonts that are called variable fonts don't actually have these defined sections. They just have the slider, and designers can choose at any point along that slider that they want to extend like the weight of a font. There can even be sliders now for width. So you might have a H like this, and then that's on the low end of the slider. But then you could also have a H on the high end of the slider, and it controls the width of that font as well. These are really cool. They're starting to come out. They've been around for ages, but nobody actually liked them because they were too complicated. And now in the past couple of years, they're making a resurgence, which is quite nice. Oblique and italic are largely interchangeable. Oblique tends to be for when there is an actual designed oblique slanted font. Yeah. So if somebody has included an oblique font in their typeface, it will be called oblique. If you are making a font italic, it doesn't necessarily have a specifically designed type font in that typeface. It could just be that the word processor or whatever you're using will just be slanting or skewing that particular thing. And I think that's the difference between oblique and italic. Just a modification of the regular font where it is skewed, essentially. Small caps are fonts that use all uppercase letters, but they have the height of a lowercase letter. So obviously this is your capital letter, and this is technically your lowercase letter, but it uses the same style as the uppercase letter, just smaller. Using older print formats, first few words or sentences in large bodies of text, sometimes in magazines, that sort of thing. Narrow or condensed fonts are generally the same as the normal font, but they've just been squished inwards a bit. Okay. Usually used in subtitles or for variation or to call attention to specific text, not used in large copies. And extended is the opposite of condensed. Yeah, the text has been stretched out. Exceptionally good at drawing attention, but useless for large bodies of text because they take up so much space and are difficult to read. Lastly, then, let's talk about font size. So traditionally, a font is measured in points, which I think is equal to like a portion of an inch. So an inch is divided into 72 points, and a font size of 72 points, therefore, would be 1 inch tall. So occasionally, the font size might be determined in other ways, such as pixels, or you might have seen ems or percentages, but largely these are all just relative, whereas points is a fixed amount of size. So that's it for this episode, but this is part of a larger series. Next time, we're going to be taking a look at the anatomy of types, all these things that make up typography, yeah? What's this horizontal stroke called here? What's this little bit on the end? What's this bit on an eye called? It's called a tittle, which is hilarious. What's, this horizontal bar? What's this stem called? Well, it's called a stem, I just told you. What's this little gap in the A called? Yeah, that's what we're going to be exploring next time around. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining me on this journey. I'm excited about this series, and hopefully you'll stick around for the other episodes where we'll dive into this world of typography a little bit further. Thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time on TipTut.
Remember to subscribe for more tips, tricks, and tutorials. Thanks for watching.